before the great earthquake of 1906, right around the corner of 3rd and Mission was the cultural hub of San Francisco, and then for about a century, well, it was a lot of parking lots. And 20 years ago, it started to become again the cultural nexus of San Francisco. And one of the jewels in the crown of that cultural nexus is the Contemporary Jewish Museum. With us today, my longtime friend and colleague, the chief curator of the Jewish, Renny Pritikin. Renny, welcome.
Thank you so much, David.
So 20 years after we broke ground, and probably broke a lot of bones along the way too, metaphysically, for Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, did you think you'd be back heading up the Jewish?
It's so ironic. My bulk of my career has been in the corner of Mission and 3rd. Never would have thought that would happen.
Yeah. So you've been there now how long?
4.5 months.
And what does it feel like?
I'm having a ball. One thing I realized, I never thought about working in a culturally specific institution, but I very quickly realized that every institution you work for has parameters, has a mission, and you find your way to fulfilling your vision through the mission. And so it's no different here. I'm learning a lot about Judaism, which is really a pleasure. And the folks I've inherited, the staff, are just terrific, and the programming coming up is so exciting. So I couldn't be happier.
Right. Now, I know your resume because we've known each other for 20-some years, but for our viewers, talk a little bit about your journey from before Yerba Buena to now.
Well, I grew up in New York City and moved to San Francisco in the 70s. Got my master's at San Francisco State, where I met my wife, actually. And first job was at New Langton Arts, which was an alternative space founded in the 70s. Part of the radicalization of the art world, where artists saw themselves as needing to be empowered and set up their own institutions. And so I was part of that movement for many years, and built that institution up to be quite a national model.
And it was one of the reasons that you were selected to be artistic director at Yerba Buena Center for the Arts.
Yeah, well, maybe you know why I got that job.
You were an arts radical.
Yeah, well, I think I had some credentials for grassroots work, but I did, when Yerba Buena was being built, every person I knew wanted that job, and miraculously somehow I got it.
Yeah, I remember once during that inaugural year, you were in your office and I came by and I said, "So how does it feel?" And you said, "I get paid to think." I can't believe it.
That's still a metaphor that I live by, is I sit at my desk and think and read and occasionally talk to people, and 2.5 years later, I go to the opening of this exhibition, and all these artists have worked, and the public has gotten interested. It's a miraculous journey that I reenact over and over. I still get a complete buzz out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now, has the radical art curator and activist, have you become the establishment?
Yeah, I think so. I look at these young kids, and I've actually been in a situation where I'm talking to someone in their 20s, and I can see that they're thinking, "I'm talking to Renny Pritikin, I'm talking to..." And it's like, it's kind of flattering, but also like not what you really want.
Right.
You want that personal. So I was at Yerba Buena for more than a decade, and then I moved on to UC Davis, where I ran the Nelson Art Gallery, and then I just started here 4.5 months ago.
Now I'm going to talk some more specifics about the Jewish, but before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about, in general, the neighborhood that you're in, Yerba Buena. I mean, we were both there at the beginning, and it didn't start out as an arts neighborhood. It's kind of, as my grandmother used to say, a place that got built bass-ackwards. Why is Yerba Buena now this cultural hotbed?
It was a decision that was really made in the city government, in the redevelopment agency. They had gotten rid of all these SRO hotels, and Helen Sauce of the redevelopment agency was a visionary who saw that in combination with the convention center and all the things we're familiar with now, that there should be an arts component. And the person who developed the area was required to build low-income housing for the elderly and recreation and entertainment, and we're familiar with the bowling alley and all that stuff, and culture was part of it, but they didn't just stop there. It's kind of visionary leadership. They made room for the Museum of Modern Art, the Museum of the African Diaspora, the Jewish Museum, et cetera, et cetera. What I'd like to say is that most art museums are grassroots organized by artists, or they're top-down wealthy people through largesse doing things for their cities, but Yerba Buena was a distinct, unusual real estate deal.
It was a real estate deal that became a haven for artists.
Yeah.
Now, specifically at the Jewish, I mean, you have a beautiful facility. It's a historic, at least the facade is a historic building designed by Willis Polk. It was an old electric generating power station. And then behind it, you have this incredibly modern, contemporary design by, I believe,
Daniel Libeskind,
the designer originally conceptually of the New World Trade Center.
Right, and other major institutions in Europe and around the world. Yeah, a major boutique architect for sure. And his vision is quite extraordinary. It's become, the director, Laurie Starr, likes to say it's our collection, because we're a non-collecting institution. But the building is one of the most photographed buildings in San Francisco, and people really, anyone who's interested in architecture, and the general public as well, find it quite dramatic.
Now, what I remember reading when the design first was unveiled, that there is some symbolic nature to Liebeskind's design behind the Willis Polk facade.
There's a lot of Jewish stuff in there, and a lot of references to Kabbalah, and so in Jewish tradition, 18 is a special number. 1 and 8 is 9, you know, and 18 is lucky. So, and it's also the number associated with Chai, the word for
life,
God,
or God.
God and life. Yeah, life, really. So what he did, he had this brick rectangle, and he pierced it with the letter Chai. So there's this purple tile letter that comes in at a diagonal, and it's part the bookstore and part one of the galleries. And at the very top, the tip of the Yud, the YUD is the name of the gallery at the top. But it's the letter Chai is a post and a squiggle. And there are 36 windows in that room, small windows, so it's double high, double luck. So we've rented sometimes for weddings and bar mitzvahs because it's an auspicious.
I was about to say, so Jewish families must love it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it is actually a very beautiful, almost spiritual room because it's at an angle, and there's no right angles anywhere in the room. So
now we know that institutions, after the blaze of glory of their first year, sometimes have a hard time attracting audiences. I know you've only been there 4 months, but what is it like at the Jewish now? Is it still as popular as it was when it opened? I mean, there was a rush of people to get in. Yeah,
it's actually, the attendance has been strong throughout. It's interesting that it's, when we were at Yerba Buena, we were getting about 50,000, and we're getting more than twice that. So it's not the numbers that SF MoMA gets, but for a relatively new building, not a new institution, but a new building, we're doing quite well. I'm impressed with the numbers.
So tell me about some of the exhibits that you have done. I mean, I know you've just been there a few months, but some of the things that have really put the Jewish on the map, but more specifically what you've got coming up.
Well, the opening show was amazing. It was commissioning about 9 or 10 artists on the theme of Genesis, and that was very sensational. But there have been many other very interesting things that have been done. The one that got a great deal of attention was the Gertrude Stein joint exhibition with SF MoMA, where they did her art collection, and the contemporary Jewish did her history, and that was very popular. There's been a strong tradition of photography. The radical Jewish photographers in New York in the 40s was a really interesting show. There's a tradition of doing work with children's book authors. Very strong commitment to education and children and family programming, and that's been one of the highlights. And we're working on one that we're about to open by J. Otto Siebold. I don't know if you were at Yerba Buena when. J. Otto is a local treasure, grew up in the East Bay, still lives in the East Bay. He's in his 50s. Published some children's books that many people grew up on, called Mr. Lunch books. He had a dog named Mr. Lunch, and he wrote these 3 books with his wife, Vivian Walsh, about Mr. Lunch's adventures. One takes place in a TV studio, actually. So we're doing a show on the 25th anniversary of Mr. Lunch. That's coming up next month. And we're opening a show about the great 20th century photographer Arnold Newman, who was a photographer for Life and Look magazine.
Mid-century.
Mid-century. It's very interesting because we have the current show, which is a show that we organized and is one of the biggest hits we've ever had, and we're traveling it to the East Coast, is called Designing Home, Jews in Mid-Century Modernism. Amazing fact that we didn't really know about until we did the research was that in the 40s and 50s, American-born Jews and Jews who fled Europe and were trained in the Bauhaus joined together and had an enormous impact on American architecture and design. So that shows up for another month in our main gallery. But interestingly, the 3 great journalistic photographers of that same mid-century modern era, Arnold Newman, Richard Avedon, and Irving Penn, were also Jewish.
Wow.
So they had a mid-century modern impact on photography in this country.
Right. Last question in our last few moments. You said something interesting at the beginning of the interview, and it made me think, did I forget Rennie's history? You said, I'm learning a lot about Judaism. I was like, well, I thought you were Jewish. How much is the Jewish Contemporary Museum about Judaism?
It's very much about Judaism.
I mean, you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah. No, it's a Jewish institution. It's not a political institution.
Yes.
People make a mistake of thinking that. It's a cultural institution. It's a contemporary art institution. But we're looking at contemporary art through the lens of Jewish tradition, Jewish values, and Jewish ideas. And so even though I was raised Jewish, I was raised in a non-fervent environment. I was bar mitzvahed, but there are wonderfully knowledgeable people on the staff who help me out so much with terms and ideas that I can go to and round out my exhibitions.
Great. Well, we look forward to seeing you again on the show. I'm glad to see you're still being paid to think. Gives me hope for the arts in San Francisco, the Bay Area. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, man.
Next up, our conversation with the Vice Mayor of Richmond. We will learn about her campaign to stop bullying for her citizens and, frankly, for her. We'll be right back.